Hi all, Megan May here, and I wanted to make a quick video about an emerging situation in India that has really piqued my interest and I think might be of interest to some others. This is about an ongoing outbreak of avian influenza, or bird flu as we more commonly call it. There's a couple of reasons why this one outbreak in particular, as opposed to all the others, I really wanted to stop and talk about a little bit. Two big reasons. The first is this is happening in the Union Territory of Delhi in India. It's a really densely populated area and it's not remotely associated with poultry farms, which is pretty unusual for bird flu outbreaks. Okay, that's reason number one. Reason number two is the strain of bird flu that it is. It's a strain called H5N8. This is not the one we usually hear about as being this terrifying thing on the news. It's a newer strain. So when did this thing first appear? So H5N8 emerged on a poultry farm in South Korea in 2014, and from there it rapidly spread all over the world. So it's only 2016, so this has not been very long. Okay, so the big story with H5N8 is that it seems like for the first time people have really been able to pin this almost exclusively on migratory birds, as opposed to poultry trade. Poultry trade played a minor role in it spreading so quickly around the world, but really migratory birds were the big story here. It's something that in the field of emerging diseases we've been worried about for a very long time with avian influenza. When we think about changing patterns in bird migration, how does that play into disease outbreaks and disease spread? Alright, so this is a cool situation. Here's the story in Delhi that's going on right now. On October 18th, a deer park, a small zoo, closed its doors immediately once they had a few positive tests come back for bird flu. And it turned out it was strain H5N8. So the birds in question were migratory birds that happened to be hanging around the zoo. Okay, so that happened last week. And then within the past 48 hours, as of me making this recording on October 25th, there have been 10 more dead birds reported from the surrounding area. 5 of them were also zoo birds, three Peking ducks and 2 additional migratory birds. But the others are from outside the zoo in the city. So again, this is a really rapidly developing situation. They closed the zoo several days ago at this point. 3 of them were crows and 1 of them was a migratory bird. Most notably, this last migratory bird was found in a place called the Asolavati Sanctuary, which is a notorious nesting site for bird migrations. And so you might have birds come into this site, nest for a bit, and then whenever it's seasonally appropriate, they're going to go somewhere else in the world. So this suddenly becomes a very big deal when you have H5N8 in this nesting site, and you can suddenly see it not go from there to one other place, but from there to several other places. So epidemiologically, this is pretty interesting. So the good news here is that there has never been a single case of humans contracting H5N8 avian influenza. That's not the case with H5N1, the strain we usually hear about, where humans don't contract it very frequently, but when they do, it has this astronomically high mortality rate and it's quite terrifying. So H5N8 doesn't seem to infect humans as of now. But that's when we get into the other interesting piece about this story. H5N8 is really promiscuous. And what I mean by that is that it's incredibly mutable. It's very able to change this gene sequence with a shocking degree of frequency. Influenza viruses in general are very good at changing their gene sequence. They have an incredibly high level of diversity. But H5N8 seems to be the highest of the high for this. When I went and looked into the literature a little bit about this, just a couple of weeks ago, 13th of October 2016, a paper came out which was already describing some atypical sequences for H5N8. This was written by this work was performed, and the paper was written by a scientist from Japan called Dr. Yamaguchi. They had locally found some isolates, one in a Peking duck and one in a swan, where the H protein, that's the H that gives it the strain name H5, it had changed its gene sequence quite a bit in a very meaningful way, and it had changed it so much that when they took those viruses out of the duck and the swan and they infected chickens with them, they found that even between those two strains that had the changes in their gene sequence, they were suddenly quite different in terms of the clinical disease they produced in chickens. So this thing changes very quickly, and the changes that it makes in its gene sequence translate directly into changes in clinical presentation. Similarly, the Global Consortium for H5N8 and related influenza viruses published their report, I believe it was the 20th of October, so very, very recently, in Science Magazine. I'll put the links to both of these studies in the comments below this video, where they determined, as a community of global experts, that indeed H5N8 is highly, highly, highly mutable and changeable. And in particular, it's mutable and changeable in the H protein's gene. The reason why that matters is that the H protein, which the long name of that is the hemagglutinin protein, this is the protein that's directly responsible for allowing influenza viruses to pick out and attach to a host cell. The reason that matters clinically is that it's going to dictate not only what tissues are able to be infected with that influenza virus strain, but also what host. So, if you think about it, the cells on the surface of my trachea are quite different than the cells on the surface of a chicken trachea and the cells on the surface of a horse trachea. In addition to that, the cells on the surface of my trachea are different than the cells lining the inside of my nose, and different than the cells that are in the bronchi of my lungs, which are different than the cells in the lower lobes of my lungs. Okay? And if you start changing a protein that's responsible for mediating the interaction between a virus and cell surfaces, you start giving that virus differing abilities to interact with those cells. It might not have ever come up explicitly, but hopefully intuitively, you could kind of see that a virus that's only capable of associating with cells on the inside of my nose is going to give me a fairly mild disease. It's going to give me a kind of sniffly, nonsensy upper respiratory disease. I'm going to be really good at passing it to people around me, but it's not really going to kill me. However, that being said, a virus that can bind way deep down in the lower lobes of my lungs, that's where it's going to cause all of its damage. And the lower lobes of my lungs are rather critically important to things like, breathing and gas exchange. So, that being said, if we have a virus that right now is capable of binding the respiratory tract of migratory birds by this H protein, but that H protein likes to change a lot, what we can say about that is that it's possible that H protein can change in such a way that allows it to bind human respiratory tract, or pig respiratory tract, or horse respiratory tract. This is not a simple one-step process, but it does happen. We know that, right? Because we've seen several influenza pandemics start exactly that way. So that being said, while the story out of this outbreak in Delhi at the moment is this does not infect humans, which it does not, the thing that we really want to keep in mind, and I really want to emphasize, is that it doesn't right now. But that story could be quite different a few months from now, because this virus changes a lot. and it changes very quickly. And it changes the trait that allows it to interact with host cells. So when that trait changes, it's quite plausible that its host range and its tissue tropism, or its tissue range that it can infect, is going to change as well. So, that being said, what's the take-home point here? Anybody watching this who lives in Delhi, what do you take away from this? First being, don't be terrified because this does not infect humans. However, if you come across a dead bird, do not touch it, because while it doesn't infect humans now, it plausibly could someday in the not too distant future. So you definitely want to be very, very cautious if you come across birds that may have died of this. All right, that's the take-home. The other take-home is the territorial government of Delhi is being extremely cautious and diligent. They've deployed 10 separate rapid response teams to try to identify all the birds in the local area that have been infected and cull them and make sure that none of the remaining birds are testing positive. They also have quite a store of the antiviral medication oseltamivir handy, which treats influenza infection. But that being said, the best piece of advice you could do is stay away from any sick birds, stay away from dead birds, and everybody in regions that have migratory birds whose path includes this particular part of the world, keep an eye on them, and if they seem sick, might be something to call the regional authorities about for testing. Alright, so that being said, influenza is always interesting, and it's always exciting, and it's always changing. But this particular one was noteworthy for a few reasons to me. Hope you enjoyed. Talk to you later. Bye.